Okay, so for this science study, we're going to look at red blood cell production through the lifespan. And so looking at the objectives, first we're going to look at just how red blood cell production changes in childhood. So we'll look at the globin chains. They change from fetal hemoglobin to alpha and beta. You'll see physiological nadir, which is basically around 12 weeks. There's a drop in the hemoglobin levels, just because when the infant is first born, it actually doesn't produce hemoglobin. And then we'll also look at just the hemoglobin and the more mean corpuscle volumes and how they change with age. From there, we'll look at what the changes that happen with puberty, aging, and pregnancy. And also we'll talk about briefly how pregnancy puts an increased demand on iron and folate. So when the infant is first born, they'll have really high levels of fetal hemoglobin. And the reason for this is basically the placenta is an anoxic environment, so it has very low oxygen levels. And so for the fetus to compensate for this, it basically produces a lot of hemoglobin, fetal hemoglobin. So when the fetus is born, it comes from an anoxic environment and exposed to the air. And so this increased oxygen, so the oxygen increases rapidly when it's first born, decreases the production of EPO. And so basically, for the first couple weeks after birth, the infant basically doesn't produce any hemoglobin. So what you see is if you chart the hemoglobin concentration, which is in grams per liter, when it's first born, I got the chart here of all the values. When the infant is first born, you'll see a range of about 135 to 225 grams per liter. But then by around 12 weeks, there'll be a dip. So around 12 weeks, and this 12-week point is called the physiological nadir. And it dips down to around 90 grams per liter. And that's in a term infant. In a preterm infant, it can drop as low as 70 grams per liter, just because the infant hasn't had time to produce as much hemoglobin before birth. After that, you'll see that the hemoglobin levels will increase again up until adulthood. And then into the elderly, the hemoglobin should stay relatively constant, but what you'll often see is that they'll be deficient in iron, and this iron deficiency causes a slight decrease in the hemoglobin levels. As for the mean corpuscle volume, when the infant is first born, these hemoglobins are very large, so there's a high mean corpuscle volume. This will fall, and around childhood it'll be the lowest. So between 1 year and 12 years, what you'll see is between 70 and like 90. And then it'll go back up, and by adulthood, it should be around 80 to 98 is the volume of the red blood cells. Boys and girls, they should, as they grow up, they have relatively the same levels of hemoglobin until you reach puberty. And once you reach puberty, because of the increased testosterone, it affects EPO, and basically, so what you'll see after puberty is that males will have an increased level of hemoglobin. So males have about 140 to 180 grams per liter, and females are around 120 to 160. And that's accountable to the increased testosterone. Interestingly enough, this is not seen across all mammals. So you see it in humans, but if you look at horses, with horses, there is no change between males and females. And so the evolutionary reasoning behind this is that on the African plains, basically humans, the males did all the hunting, so they'd have to have high endurance to run down the antelopes. Whereas for horses, all they have to do, both the males and the females have to outrun their predators. So it doesn't matter, they didn't have to vary their hemoglobin levels. Another thing is because testosterone does increase EPO, you will actually see bodybuilders and other athletes that use androgens. They will have increased levels of red blood cells, and so this can result in polycythemia or erythrocytosis. Basically, they're the same thing, high levels of red blood cells. And they used to treat red blood cell deficient people with androgens until they started to produce EPO. And so now EPO is used to treat low red blood cell counts. Okay. Now, when you look at pregnancy, because the mother has to support herself and the growing fetus, you'll see an increase in both the plasma levels. So the plasma levels will increase about 40 to 50%, and the total red blood cell count, or the total red blood cells, will increase about 20 to 30%. Okay? And because the plasma actually increases more than the red blood cells, what you'll see is a hemodilution. So the concentration of hemoglobin will go down in females to about 110 grams per liter. Another thing that changes with pregnancy is the platelet count also goes down between 8 to 10%. Platelets go down. And so this is also, they attribute it to hemodilution. And to compensate for this, you'll see an increase in coagulation factors, such as fibrinogen, factor 8, and also von Wilhelm factors. And you'll see a decrease in protein S. And these will increase quite a bit, and the reason for this is after birth, you don't want the mother bleeding too much and too much blood loss, so you have an increased coagulation factors. And what that does is that does put the mother at risk for venous thromboembolism, which is basically an increased risk of clots in the vein. And so one thing that you'll look for in postpartum women, so women that have already given birth, is you'll look for edema in the legs. And that would be a sign of an embolism forming. And women that have edema or at risk of venous thromboembolism are given heparin. With regards to iron demands, there is a chart listed in the assigned study. I read in the textbook, makes it maybe a little easier to remember the numbers, is basically for the mother's demand, you'll see the mother demands about 600 milligrams of extra iron, and the fetus demands about 300 for its blood. And so this mother is just for more oxygen use and also for bleeding. During birth, the mom can lose about 200 to 400 milliliters of blood. And that's a vaginal birth, and actually a C-section is about double that volume. I feel like I wanted to add one more thing in.